Cool. So we'll open this information session / workshop at 4:39. First up, just do we have any formal apologies? Just Bridget today. We don't need to move any of that, do we? Being here.
Yep.
And then the first item on the agenda is the Riccarton Interceptor Gravity Main Project update. If you'd like to come and take a seat, and we'll crack into it.
Hello everyone, good afternoon. My name is David Kudu. I'm the team leader of Water Supply Capital Delivery.
And I'm Don Gracia, the project manager for this project.
Yeah, so we'll be talking about the Riccarton Interceptor, of course. I've gotten asked by Brent Smith to come and deliver we have been asked to deliver just a big project update, and I'll let Don go nuts.
So the job is to install an interceptor wastewater line from, if we can open the map, I guess it's easier to.
Can we go to the next? Thank you.
Yeah. So we need an upgrade of the existing DN450 line along Maidstone, Craig Road, and Clyde because of the growth around the industrial area near the airport, the Coda Park, Memorial Avenue Investments Limited. So what we're doing is laying a DN600 gravity from the we'll intercept some of the flows along Waimāero-Harewood, Maidstone, and then lay a gravity line down to Maidstone, Craig, and then Clyde. We have started with the downstream one. So we've already laid the receiving manhole on Clyde Road, going up towards Craig. And if you've been around that area, there's a lot of traffic management around that stage. What we're currently doing is, if we go on on the fifth slide, so that there's a picture that you can see. That's the program. We'll go back to that later on. But if you go to the fifth slide where the picture is, so we are now doing the siphon works because we need to go under the stream.
The Oak-Over?
Yeah, the Oak-Over stream near Kate Shepherd House. So we will be doing a siphon structure in there, which means we'll be building 2 big manholes and a pipe that goes under the stream. So that's what the big excavation is there at the moment. As you can see, we are on track and on budget at this stage, and we are just doing a lot of dewatering works, as you can see from the photos, because the brick arch under that stream is actually, there's no foundation under it. So when we pushed through the pipe, we've encountered a lot of water in there. So we're doing a lot of dewatering. So the work over there is going slowly but surely. It's quite safe. We are now reaching the intersection of Clyde and Craig Road. So we've actually increased the traffic management around that area. If you look at the some of the other updates in there, so the work on the Craig Road part, we're doing some of the laterals. So because we need to renew that as well. So we're doing a lot of laterals along Clyde Road. And then once we lay the new DN600 receiving line, then we'll attach those, we'll connect those laterals. The program, as if we can go back to the third slide. So no, that's the fourth. Sorry, that's if the third slide, please. Yeah. So we've got 2 crews working on site at the moment. So we've started with University Drive where the receiving manhole is. And then we've gone through quite quickly along Clyde Road, knowing that we've got a challenge on the works. And then after that, we are now heading straight to the intersection of Clyde and Craig Road. The Craig Road 1 is we've got another crew in there. So basically, we're meeting on that intersection, and we're hoping that we can be there within April, finish April, and then open up the whole Clyde Road by that time. If you look through the program, we are on track and on budget, and we're just hoping that we don't find anything else in there that will limit our ability to finish. But otherwise, if all going good, we'll be finished. The whole work will be finished by July 2026.
Of course, there's lots of traffic management. There's a lot of public interest in the streets and everything else around there. That first slide that we showed you, the blue area was the area that we're currently working on, but there are other details in here as well, which indicate different works as well. Yeah. So we're having to organise it's a bit of a salad bar out there at the moment. Yeah. But that's where we're at. We're happy with our program. We're happy with the work that's being done so far. There have been a couple of complaints from the public because there is a number of works there. Most of them have turned out to be not the Three Waters work. So we're quite happy about that. But what work we have had complaints about is basically just traffic management.
Yeah, traffic management and noise because of the pumps due to the dewatering requirement. We've got no other recourse because it's a gravity main, so we need to lay it perfectly, otherwise it won't work.
So that's basically it. We're happy to take any questions that you may or may not have.
Yeah, well, one for me to start. How long is this growth and capacity expected to last? Like, will that be like a 20 years? Like, do you have a projection in terms of how long you think that will cover the needs, or is it a 50-year type thing usually? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, we're not quite sure about that. We just go and build the stuff. I'm happy to get those answers for you though.
Okay, no, that's all right.
I was just wondering, I don't understand a lot, but were you expecting to have to do the dewatering when you went underneath the part around Kate Shepherd House? Were you expecting that because there's no foundations?
Yes, we have.
Okay.
It's part of the methodology of the contractor, really. So timing now is quite perfect because it's not raining as much. Yeah. So the sooner that we're out there, that's better. Because once we go up, out of all the areas in there, it's Craig Road and that siphon works, particularly that requires a lot of dewatering. Once we go across Island through Maidstone, it's not that as bad because we're going to be a bit higher. So it's we're laying it like that anyway. So Maidstone.
Okay,
so that's the top end. Yeah. That's essentially the bottom end.
Yeah.
Okay.
Are we, this is really good, thank you. So Island Road, is there any work being done on that, or is that completely separate?
Oh, the Island Road one, it's we're just crossing Island Road. The other work that was done before that was the cycleway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's no new piping or anything going down?
No. That's not. We're just
that light blue, the area in light blue.
Yeah, so, okay, and then what are we planning on doing from Island Road to Waimairi Road, is that all going to be closed at some stage as well?
We'll do a one-way traffic management, similar to what's happening at the moment.
Okay, okay. So which way will that go? Because just thinking in the mornings, everyone's going that way, and then on the way out, they're all coming.
Because the current setup is that it's one way from Clyde to Island, along Craig. So it's going to look similar to that. So it's from Island to
So is there a way that, just because I know that area really well, we both do, Nicola, don't we really well, is there a way that the traffic management can push cars? It's everyone's going into town in the morning, and then on the way home it works fine because everyone's coming back out. Can we do something? Can we be more creative? Just given it's going to be another year and a half, basically. Can we look at, I'd really like, that would be great if we could look at flowing traffic in the morning and then flowing it out at night. Because in theory, we're only just changing the
theory.
And I love theory.
Changing traffic management plans are significantly more difficult than that.
Yeah, but there's literally thousands of cars from that community that we're sending down Island Road or Greers Road, and we've narrowed Island Road.
We can ask a question.
Yeah, that would be good, because particularly when we get to, I mean, if at the point where we're doing from Waimairi to Island, if we're doing that one way out of town, you're just going to have, it's going to be a terrible, and it will. So it's either we're better to plan for it than have us all have a meltdown on the day, and then you have to do something. So
people tend to get furious in their cars.
Yeah, and it blocks up. I mean, Waimāero Road blocks up anyway, right through Greers with Burnside High and King, everything, and then the roundabout down. So it would be great if we could. It would be cool to have a look, and then if we could get Aidan like the update around if we can do it, can we see if it's feasible to do that? Because it is a real. It's,
we can refer to our.
If it was 3 months, you'd go bear with it, but
a year and a bit.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
Any other questions, James? Anyone else?
No.
Other questions from you online, Aaron?
Thank you.
All good, thanks.
That's great.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Yeah, cheers. Hello.
Good. Hello. Mark.
Kia ora. Mark Stevenson.
Floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. This is it's a lengthy presentation, but I'll just give you highlights. And it's about a plan change that we're initiating to the district plan, or our rule book as we're calling it. The plan change relates principally to the interface between industrial zones and residential zones, and I'll talk about it specifically in the context of the board's area of interest. I've just got some introductory slides, so we'll go through them reasonably quickly. This is just summarising what we'll cover today, and I'll cover the scope of the plan change, what we're dealing with in terms of geographic area, what the district plan is doing at the moment and managing that interface, what we're proposing, and then open to questions and feedback. Aidan, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
So the issues that we're seeking to address aren't new. There's been some concern about the effects of industrial activity on residential properties for a number of years. 2002 notice of motion was passed by council out of concern about the lack of controls on shipping containers in particular, and that's been in the context of area in Heathcote, but it's an issue across the city of industrial where it borders residential, of there being adverse effects, and we're now seeking to address that. Any plan change that we make to the district plan to change the rules or the policies can only be effective for development or land use changes that happen after the rules have gone through a process. We can't, unfortunately, do anything about existing activities that have been established lawfully and have consent. And in doing so, we want to make sure the rules better manage that interface. Over time, there'll be sites that are redeveloped or land use changes, and any new use that comes along in the future or new development that pops up would have to comply with new rules. So through that redevelopment of land, we can seek improved outcomes. But for an existing business that's been there, say, 20 years and is continuing without significant change, we can't address those effects. Also, just to note, this diagram, which has a lot of words, sets out that the rules in the district plan operate on the premise that if you comply with all the rules and it states that an activity is permitted, then that can proceed without resource consent. Where it breaches any standard or rule in the plan, then resource consent is triggered, and that enables us to assess the effects of that activity. There is some residents we hear from who see the rules in the district plan as in a way that if an activity is permitted, like housing in a residential zone, then that's what to expect, and that other activities that are not permitted, they won't see in their neighbourhood. Unfortunately, the rules in the district plan are only a trigger for consent. They're not a veto or not of what happens. Next slide, please. Also, just briefly, there's some effects that we hear about which the district plan unfortunately can't manage, and that includes concerns about health and safety. So an example has been given of falling containers, discharges of odour or dusts, other matters that we don't directly control. That's the domain of Environment Canterbury, but we work closely with Environment Canterbury to ensure that the activities that we allow through the district plan are not in the wrong locations that gives rise to dust or odour that's going to cause a nuisance. And we manage stormwater discharges from industrial sites as well as other sites through council's bylaw, as well as a global consent, and Environment Canterbury also have rules. Thanks, Aidan. So in our district plan, I'll use the map on the next slide if you don't mind, Aidan, just to talk to this. We've got industrial zones in clusters across the city represented by the purple areas, and I'll zoom in on some areas in the northwest shortly. But effectively, we've got 3 different industrial zones. We've got what's called an industrial general zone, which is an industrial zone that typically borders residential areas, and where the intent is not to allow the same range of effects that would otherwise be allowed in a heavier industrial environment. So the intent is that those industrial areas bordering residential, that there's not the noise impacts, not the odour, and that's a function of the types of activities that can locate there. Heavy industrial areas are generally separated from residential areas, although in Belfast there is some heavy industrial zoned land directly beside residential neighbours, and we do see conflict in those circumstances. There's obviously at Belfast, there's the freezing works that have long been established and other activity that we classify as heavy industrial. And then in the northwest, we define what's called an industrial park zone, which by the name seeks a greater level of open space and tree planting. We haven't seen those areas develop. So the prime example is the block on the corner of Russley Road and Waimāero Avenue. When that is developed, we anticipate a higher amenity environment than your typical industrial zone. The same goes for land where Tate's campus is. That's an example of the type of outcome we're seeking, where there's a genuine effort at landscaping and design. We'll go on to the next slide, Aidan. So the district plan at the moment has objectives, policies and rules. Objectives set out what outcome we're seeking, and then the policies and rules work together to explain how we're going to achieve that. And the rules control a range of different effects and include building height, setback limits, outdoor storage controls, as well as other controls. And that slide just describes that in more detail. If we jump to the next slide, Aidan. There's a range of industrial activities allowed across different industrial zones, and the 3 columns there, the general, the heavy and the park, are the 3 different types of industrial zones we have, as I explained. The intent, as I mentioned, is that heavy industrial activity like scrap metal yards, freezing works, and other what we call heavy industrial activity is not allowed within areas that are close to residential, and so that's why in red it requires consent where it's in the industrial general zone or industrial park zone. Otherwise, there's a range of industrial activities permitted across all three zones. There's an issue insofar as without enough distinction between the types of activities allowed in each of the industrial zones, there's a risk of uses that are not defined as heavy industrial locating where they shouldn't be, and they're giving rise to complaints. Next slide, Aidan. And the slide summarises some of the issues that have been raised. We did some work some years ago, and that's appended to the cover sheet for this briefing of complaints. And there were a number of complaints in the Belfast area about activities, namely the operation of machinery. But as you can imagine, the issues that arise are common across the city's industrial areas where they are close to residential. Now we'll jump to the next slides. If you move on one from that, it's got some specific parts of the board area which are of more interest. And on the right is the Belfast. Sorry, just to explain the colours first. The pink represents the industrial general zone. That's the lighter industrial area. The blue is heavy industrial, and the green is the industrial park zone. I'll start on the left. So the southernmost green blob is the corner of Russley Road and Memorial Avenue. Then to the north of that green blob is the area north of Waiāero Road, immediately east of Russley Road. And you may have driven, when you come off State Highway 1 onto Waiāero Road, you can see some of the subdivisions starting there. And then the pink just to the right of that is the established industrial area of Sheffield Crescent, and along Waiāero Road where you've got mechanics and car repairs. And then the blue to the far north is a heavy zone, which is off Johns Road, Greyweki Road and so forth. And then you've got a small industrial area just off Cavendish Road, corner of Starrocks and Cavendish, opposite the Somerset Retirement Village. And then Belfast is where the largest industrial areas are and have been long established, and where we've got a stronger presence of heavy industrial activity. There's on the slide, there's buffers shown of 100, 250 and 500 metres. Those buffers represent nothing more than to indicate that the greatest concentration of complaints tends to be in that 150 metre buffer, with some complaints still beyond that, between 250 and 500 metres, depending on the activity. But and these three snippets aren't all the industrial areas in the board area. There's also industrial activity on off Vagues Road, west of Marion College. There's also industrial activity Cranford Street, and then up behind Northlink Retail Park off Soys Arms Road. So as a consequence, there's a number of interfaces. Next slide. This is an example from Heathcote of where the view from a residential area across the river of the container. If we jump to the next one. And this is from Alston of car wreckers. And whilst these are examples from outside the board area, there are examples of activities like this elsewhere in the city, and we're trying to better manage that through this plan change. So this visualization just shows if that was an industrial site opposite a residential zone. We've got some controls in the district plan at the moment, but notably at the moment there's no height limit on outdoor storage. So a company could have a very tall pile of materials located opposite a residential zone. At the moment, if industrial sites are opposite a residential across the road from a residential zone, at the moment, we only require a 1.5 metre road setback from the road. And the other oddity is that someone could put landscaping in, but then a fence between the landscaping and the boundaries such that any landscaping is ineffective because we can't see it. So there's some deficiencies with the district plan at the moment, and that's what this plan change is seeking to do. If we jump to the next slide, it's got some photos just of different sites where there's examples of some good landscaping on the bottom left, but other examples where there's just fencing or the landscaping isn't really sufficient to provide that buffer. We go to the next slide. This is an example visualization of an industrial site that's bordering a residential zone site where there's not a road separating them. And again, there's no limit on the outdoor storage in terms of height, and there's no requirement for that outdoor storage to be set back from the boundary. So there are examples where pallets could be stacked reasonably high, bordering right beside a residential property. And we're obviously not wanting that to happen. If you go to the next slide. Again, these are examples where an industrial site borders another site and some unsightly views for neighbours, which we're seeking to address. Next slide. One particular issue we're seeking to address is noise, and at the moment, the plan treats all noise the same. In some instances, noise from the dropping of a shipping container onto another shipping container can cause a thud or a clang, and it also causes a vibration-like sound. And the plan's doesn't recognise that to the extent it could, and we're looking at how the plan can better manage those effects that are described in planning terms as special audible characteristics, but to you and I are bangs and clangs that not typical. At the moment, the policy framework for industrial zone for residential areas that border industrial areas recognises that the amenity levels within a residential area that borders an industrial area may not be the same as a residential area that's separated some distance from an industrial area. So there's an expectation that those living next to an industrial area won't have an environment that is akin to that of a residential area far from an industrial area. But we do want to see improvements to the amenity over time through redevelopment. We also want to better manage those effects and address the issues I've identified. So some of the issues we've identified beyond what I've described, just on the next slide. There's, in some cases, as I mentioned, the industrial general zone acts as a light industrial buffer, but in some cases there's no buffer of that light industrial zone. Insofar as at Belfast, there's a heavy industrial zone directly beside residential neighbours. There's also an issue that the heavy industrial activity definition doesn't capture all types of what we call heavy industrial activities, and we're seeking to capture more. An example is a concrete batching plant that produces concrete, obviously, for a range of uses that can give rise to dust from pouring of the cement, and that can be an adverse effect on neighbours, obviously. The definition of, even without that term, the definition of industrial activity is quite broad. So a range of activities can occur in what's intended as the buffer when it's not, and as a consequence, it's not acting as the buffer as it should. We also permit quite a large volume of heavy vehicle movements from industrial areas at the moment, up to 250 within the industrial zone, even if it's right beside a residential property, and that can give rise to complaints of late night movements, particularly with the logistics and warehousing sector. And as I touched on, noise with special character can also cause disruption. I'll go on from that. Thanks, Aidan. There's some other more minor issues with the rules as they stand, some of which include activities being establishing within industrial areas that that can give rise to complaints, not from residential neighbours, but from other industrial companies. So in parts of the city, there's been housing and retail activity that have established in industrial areas, and people travelling through those industrial areas to go shopping, or residential neighbours that can force a business to limit their hours or reduce their operation. So to address those issues, we've commissioned a number of assessments, including acoustic, transport, landscape evidence. If we go to the next slide, Aidan, sorry. We've commissioned different assessments to better understand from a technical standpoint what the effects are and deficiencies are with our district plan. And we've identified some recommendations for addressing those effects. Without evidence, any hearings panel that considers the plan change wouldn't necessarily be satisfied with what we're putting forward. So technical evidence is fundamental to any process. And the conclusions won't be surprising insofar as the landscape assessment identified the need for a better balance of landscaping, screening, heights and setbacks at the interface. The transport assessment identified the need for greater controls on heavy vehicle movements, and the acoustic advice identified not only that the noise of banging and clanging wasn't well defined, but also that some activities are establishing at that border with the residential areas, and even if they say they're going to comply with the noise limits, the nature of their business is that they can't realistically do that. So it's about changing the status of some activities. Next slide. So this slide just summarises that we've looked at a range of different options. One of the options considered was to put greater control on the residential side and limit development on the residential side, but we're trying to take a balanced approach here and limit the effects from the source, as well as better managing effects on the receiver. Thanks, Aidan. So this slide just summarises some of the key changes we're making to the objective and policies in the industrial chapter, and it includes seeking to manage the adverse effects on the environment, improve amenity of industrial sites, and increase tree canopy cover. One thing we tried through Plan Change 14, which was on intensification of residential areas, was getting greater requirements for a proportion of a site to be set aside for trees, and we're intending to, through the landscaping controls, boost the level of tree planting and landscaping in industrial zones. Next slide, Aidan. This slide summarises some of the other changes we're making. It would require resource consent for any heavy industrial activity locating within 200 metres of a residential zone. And the list of activities on the right of the map is the types of activities that we're seeking to classify as heavy industrial that are not currently classified as that. So any of those activities listed on the right of the map could establish it right next to a residential property at the moment. So hence the concerns and what we're trying to manage. As I mentioned earlier, there's also been in the Woolston context, but relevant to the whole city, is container stacking, and concerns from residents in that area near Port Link was about the noise, the vibration, health and safety concerns of containers tumbling, but also the visual effects amongst others. There's been an environment court case recently which determined from the court's interpretation of the district plan that containers were not a building, and therefore not subject to any of the rules that apply to buildings. As a consequence, they could go higher than what a building could. They could go up to the boundary, and so the risk is that could happen elsewhere in the city. So we're trying to manage those effects. Next slide. These next two slides, I won't read them word for word. Summarise some of the changes we're making to the rules for landscaping, setbacks from the boundary, height limits, and outdoor storage where a site is next to or across the road from a residential zone. So I talked about some of the issues we've got at the moment, and so we're proposing a 2-metre landscaping strip on a shared boundary, a 3-metre landscaping strip on a road boundary. Those depths of landscaping allow for trees to grow. At the moment, the 1.5 metres landscaping strips just not deep enough to allow a tree to mature. Also putting in height limits on outdoor storage, recognising the deficiency of that. If we jump to the next slide, Aidan. This one just summarises what we're also doing within industrial zones. So a lot of what I've talked about is about the interface with residential areas, but we're also seeking to, even within industrial sites that aren't close to a residential neighbour, we're seeking to improve outcomes, and that includes requiring more trees and also improving the setback requirements, as I touched on. 2 more slides, and then I'll take questions. These are some of the other changes we're proposing, and that includes, amongst others, taking a more restrictive approach to some of the activities that are established in industrial zones, and we think they should be elsewhere, including housing, guest accommodation, education and healthcare. There are some exemptions within that, so training facilities can be established in industrial zones. There is a pathway for other types of, and a lot of what I talked about are industrial activities, but there's a range of industrial activities permitted within industrial zones. So trade suppliers, the likes of Mitre 10, can go in an industrial zone. Other activities that can establish as a right or through a consent pathway include indoor recreation centres like action sports. So whilst I talk about industrial zones as being principally for industrial activity, we do in fact allow for a range of activities. It's just we're seeking to limit some of the activities that go in there because of the complaints that they could make about industrial. We jump to the next slide. So today we started some early engagement with the community and invite feedback on what we're proposing. We're still evaluating options and still gathering evidence, and we will brief council in the coming months in April, and then report back to council to get approval to notify a plan change in May. We're proceeding at a faster pace for this plan change, recognising the issues have been around for some time and we need to act on them. And so after notification of the plan change, there's then a submissions period. People can then present to a hearing, and then a panel will make a recommendation back to council. So that's a rush, sorry, through the slides, but I'm sure you can read more if you want to. Yeah.
Any questions from anyone on any of that?
I have some.
Go for it, Suresh.
Thank you for the detailed presentation. Few questions.
Yeah.
One, when I read the agenda, all the complaints seem to be before 2020. Is it that we stopped measuring complaints, or?
No. The memo that's attached to the cover sheet was prepared some time ago. Just bear with me. We do still monitor compliance. We've got two compliance teams, one who monitor conditions of resource consents and another team that monitor compliance with the district plan rules. The memo that you're referring to was prepared in 2019. We haven't updated that memo since, but I can assure you that we still monitor complaints, and if requested, we could arrange a report with a summary of complaints since 2020 if it would assist.
No, thanks for that. The other question is, in whichever form your proposals get approved, will it apply only to new sites and applications, or will there be any retrospective effect, for example, on the container yard or industry which is already operating in the city?
So it would apply the new rules if we get through the process, and where the rules that come out the other end of the process would apply to all industrial sites across the city. They would apply to any new development that's proposed on those sites, any new subdivision, any changes of use. But if a business that is long established and has consent and is complying with the conditions of that consent and continues in that manner without increasing their operations or the effects of those operations, then we can't control that.
Understand. Thank you. My third question was, you mentioned about Christchurch City Council and ECAN having slightly different jurisdictions. We also know that the central government, through its policies, wants to fast track some of the projects to encourage industrial growth. How do these provisions impact what the central government is trying to push through?
Very good question. So the fast track approvals process that's been introduced by legislation passed in December last year effectively allows any developer or landowner to pursue proposal for development and get consent for it via the Environmental Protection Authority, which is a central government agency, and it could bypass. Council has a role to play in that process of providing comment, but that could circumvent the rules of the district plan. They do, through that process, have to consider what effects it has on the environment and put in some conditions on that consent to allow for adequate management of those effects. But what's in the district plan may, whilst it may provide us a baseline, there's nothing to preclude an applicant for the fast track process from going around it and seeking a more enabling outcome. In the context of the Fast Track Approvals Act, you may be aware the Minister last year announced a number of projects that could go through the fast track process. That included proposed industrial developments on Ryan's Road, just close to Grays Road, I believe, and another one on Pound Road, between Pound Road and Hasketts Road. And both those, we're expecting an application to be submitted to the Environmental Protection Authority very soon for the Ryan's Road development. Council will have a role to provide comments on it, but ultimately it's a national agency that determines it, or an expert panel, should I say, established by a national agency.
Thank you for that. Last question, if I may, and then I'll shut up. In one of your last slides, you talked about replacing the fuel usage with 40 kWh. Now,
yes,
as an electrical engineer, I did have difficulty in understanding the proposed change. Is it 40 kWh as in units of electricity? And if so, 40 kWh in how much time? Because you could use 40 kWh in 1 minute or 1 year.
Per hour.
Okay. So the slide strictly says 40 kilowatt hour output. It doesn't define the time. So I don't expect you to reply me, but I think the wording needs to change. And I'm saying that as an electrical engineer.
Great, thank you for picking that up. It may just be the slides, but I'll go back and check the rules.
Yes, please. Thank you. That's me. Done. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
James, Sam, Nicola, any other questions?
Thanks.
No. Aaron, anything from you?
I'm good, thanks.
Great. All right. No other questions. Great. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
When are we going to hear back from Chris Bishop about the housing stuff?
So we've been liaising with ministry officials and shared a draft a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
We've only formally submitted it to the minister today.
Right. Okay. So that could be in 6 weeks or so.
I'd say so.
Yeah. It's not too bad. Cool. Yeah.
Question I thought may have come up. Some years ago, this board, there were a number of residents concerned in Avonhead about proposal to rezone land west of Hawthornden Road. There's nothing on the table in that context.
Thanks, Mark.
When I first crop.
Oh, I know, and that's right where my house is. Got Somerset there now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks for that. It's good to know in case anyone asks. So it was around that time.
Yeah.
All right.
Just reach out.
Great. Thank you very much.
Cool. Hey, thanks. See you later.
Yeah, thank you.
And with that, that information.